I'm delighted to be joined right now on the day that I was due to fly to France on holiday for a week by the Transport Secretary Grant Shapps, who last night at about 9:45 announced that anyone returning from holiday in France, or indeed from business in France, or indeed French people coming to the UK would face 2 weeks quarantine as of 4 o'clock on Saturday morning due to the rising rate of infections in France. Good morning to you, Transport Secretary.
Morning, Julia, and I'm sorry about your holiday.
Well, I'm sorry about yours as well. You were affected when you went to Spain, quarantine, so you've been affected.
And then introduced quarantine on myself. That's right, I did, and I returned home, and I'm finally out of it. Yeah,
it's a bit of a first world problem when people are losing their lives, losing their jobs, their livelihoods. We accept that, but we are talking about huge numbers of people affected when you did the quarantine in Spain. There was no notice, just a few hours' notice for people. Realistically, no one could get home. You've given the 500,000 Brits currently in France a chance to have an attempt at getting home, getting to the ferries, getting to the planes. And of course, another 450,000, including myself, having to decide whether or not we go or not. Why are these quarantines brought in at such short notice? And why is a quarantine announced at 9:45 in the evening? My understanding was that the advice had been given to the government to start the quarantine early in the morning.
No, that's not the case. So let me just try and sort of clear all of those things up. First of all, the French government didn't publish the information till yesterday evening, I think 5 p.m. That then has to be sort of crunched by the UK Joint Biosecurity Centre. Advice then has to come up to ministers. Ministers then have to meet. The devolved administrations have to meet. Those are the reasons why it takes a few hours from the information coming out till 9:45, but not terribly long. We were straight onto it. The other point, though, is an interesting one, which is, in the case of Spain, as I well know, and to my direct cost, we introduced the quarantine almost immediately. With Spain, the numbers had gone very, very quickly, suddenly a long way north of the kind of cutoff point, which is we look at the number of cases per 100,000 of the population on a 7-day rolling average, and it had gone a long way north of the 20 figure in Spain. So we acted very quickly. Since then, actually, last week, for example, Belgium came in, and we did this system where we announced on Thursday night and then brought it in at 4 a.m. on Saturday morning. It does mean that some people may be able to return. It's a combination of practicality, for example, making sure that border force are ready to enforce the new regime, and sort of practicality, really. That's really what leads to these different times. Also making sure that the whole of the United Kingdom can move on it at the same time, which is always preferable, rather than having Scotland doing one thing, Wales doing something else, Northern Ireland and England moving in different ways.
But a lot of people still very cross, and not just people like me who've been affected by this, by these sort of blanket bans. We know where there are problems in France. The French Prime Minister, the French President, Emmanuel Macron, have both been very clear about this. We know it's in Brittany, it's around the Marseille area, it's around Paris. And we have had this with Spain, where, Balearic Islands and the Canary Islands included, and indeed the Costa del Sol, where there hasn't been a massive high rate of infections, whereas they were also affected by this blanket ban. Wouldn't it be more sensible, as we're doing in the UK, of having local lockdowns in areas where there are higher infections, that we give sensible advice and allow sensible people who say, don't go to this area or that area, that is unsafe, we advise against that travel, but everywhere else is safe? Wouldn't it be better to be a little bit more specific rather than a big blanket ban that affects effectively 1 million people?
Yes, it becomes, obviously this is something we've been looking at a lot. It becomes quite difficult to say within a country that you're travelling back from, you're okay if you've gone here, you can't go to here. It's pretty fluid, the movement within a country. And we were, for example, studying the graphs and charts, and I was talking to my opposite number, Jean-Baptiste Debarge, yesterday about the spread in France. A lot of where the higher cases are, Paris and the northwest and the south coast, are actually the holiday destinations as well. So it didn't prove practical. I take your point, and it's something that we continue to look at, particularly with regard to islands, for example, rather than within a country. But it's not quite as straightforward as it sounds to do that. And there's also, within our own country, within the United Kingdom now, because we have testing of something like 1/3 per day, and we're going up to 500,000 per day. Just to put that in proportion, I think the French testing is quite a long way behind that right now, according to the conversation I had yesterday with my opposite number. We have obviously much more granular information about what's happening in this country and in each local authority. We just don't have access to that kind of information in lots of places. And as the French Prime Minister Jean Castex said this week, unfortunately, France has been going the wrong way, and we saw the 66% increase in just a week of positive tests in France, and we simply had to act.
Well, but here's the thing where lots of people get confused and think this is all unreasonable. So somebody who's been in France for the last 2 weeks, if they can get on a ferry or a plane or get on the the Eurotunnel by 4 a.m. tomorrow, they don't have to quarantine. So I've got friends who, if they got back at 3:59 a.m. tomorrow, not a problem, not considered a risk. Oh, at 4:01, suddenly they're a terrible risk. They've got to take 2 weeks off work, probably unpaid. Kids have to miss the first couple of days of school. I mean, obviously there has to be a cut-off point. And again, you were hit by that cut-off point when you went to Spain. But do you see why a lot of people just think there is a ridiculousness to this? I mean, for instance, also, I could go to France now, and then at the end of my holiday, instead of getting my flight back, coming back directly from France, I could drive to Germany or Italy where there isn't a restriction, and then I could fly from there, and then I wouldn't be facing a quarantine. I mean, there is an absurdity.
Yeah, no, you would be facing a quarantine on that basis because it applies to where you've been in the 14 days beforehand.
Okay.
So, and you must write that on your passenger locator form that everybody has to fill out, regardless actually of whether you're coming from a travel corridor or a quarantine country, sort of regardless of the status on our list. And not to declare that accurately is a criminal offence. I mean, actually leads to a sort of criminal. You don't want a criminal record.
No, I'm not. I'm not going to break. I'm not going to break the law. I'm just saying, in theory, could someone do that?
Yeah, but addressing your earlier points of, cut-off points. Look, I understand why people will say this. I absolutely do, as you say, having been caught in it myself. But the reality is that all sorts of things to do with coronavirus have been cut-off points. Why is it that 6 people is okay, but not 7 to mix with, socially distance? Why is it it's okay to do this, but not that? There always has to be a point at which, a decision at which you say, this is the cut-off moment. And so for clarity, as well as for good reasons of administration, for example, Border Force being able to actually enact this, you do have to have those moments.
What about people who've been on holiday in other countries and are driving through France to get home, going on Channel ferries or on the Eurostar? If they get in the car in Germany or Italy, and they lock those car doors, they don't stop anywhere at all on the way, and they get to the port, do they then have to quarantine, even though they've not stepped foot in France other than in the port?
That's an excellent question, actually. So the guidance is very clear and published on the website. Anyone in that situation should definitely read it. It is the case that if you could drive notionally all the way through France from wherever you are, not get out the car, not get out on the tunnel, and find yourself in England, then you don't need to quarantine. That is the case. So we had this, for example, last week with Belgium, whilst France was still on the travel corridor list, and you could travel, if you could travel through the country, perhaps travel through Belgium without getting out the car, without refueling, then that is okay. So there's very clear guidance, instructions, in fact, on the gov.uk website on exactly what to do in those situations.
All right. And in terms of the threat of reciprocal measures from France, so people go, oh, well, I'll go, maybe people who are retired and just say, look, I don't have to worry about school returning. I've not got a job to go to, or I can work from home when I get back. I may as well go and take my holiday. I can't get my money back. Are those people likely to be hit by Emmanuel Macron imposing reciprocal measures? Basically, they'll be trapped in either their holiday home or their hotel for 2 weeks, unable to leave.
Yeah, their measures work when they've had them in the past, work slightly differently. I think that it's obviously for the French to say, but I think that in the friendliest possible way, they will want to make it equal in both directions. I know, and we understand that, and this is not a situation any of us want to perpetuate any longer than we need to. But yes, you should be, if you are that person you just described, you should be aware that I think the French have indicated that is quite likely as well.
Okay. And in terms of where else people can go, and again, there's no point me asking you how long this is going to last, because we don't know. And I know no one knows how long this is going to last, but certainly it's not just for a week or two. It's going to be for longer than that. Where else should we be looking at as possibly on the list? Because again, lots of people had holidays booked in Spain, cancelled those, went to France because that looked like a very safe country. Maybe a lot of people now going, oh, Italy looks safe. I think Greece, everyone was saying was safe a few weeks ago. Now Greece is seeing their infection rate going up. Is it safe for anyone to book any holiday anywhere right now?
Well, probably a staycation is the safest thing, as I've discovered this year. But having said that, you point to an interesting issue, which is it's easier to become a quarantine country than it is to get out of being quarantined. So we have to act as soon as a country's rate gets over that critical level, which is what's happened in the case of France and the Netherlands, Monaco, one, two other places this week. But to come out of that system, we'll need to see at least a good 2 or 3 weeks of being below the threshold and that maintaining, so the country hasn't just dipped down into it. So it does take slightly longer to come out. But although I haven't added any countries this week, I did last week, and countries do get added to the list where we can see things are under control. But it is, I'm afraid, this virus respects no holidays. It is absolutely, as we know, relentless, and we have to, I'm afraid, take it that there is a degree of risk involved in holidaying this summer, and let's hope that we're able to do the right things to keep it under control here.
You got out of quarantine, I think, on Monday. You returned earlier.
No, I got out yesterday.
It was only yesterday, 2 week quarantine.
And I went straight to Scotland to see that to thank the workers who had the first responders and emergency services in that terrible train crash in Stonehaven. So that was my first.
I saw the footage of that, indeed. And your family, are they out of quarantine now?
They stayed and completed their holiday, our holiday. So they only came back on Saturday. So they now are in quarantine whilst I'm free to leave the house.
You're free to leave the house, even though you're with people who apparently are a danger. So should you?
Yeah, so I have to keep distance from them. That is the way it works. So we are doing everything we can to be in different places.
These things do wonders for a marriage, Grant, I'm sure. Just finally, I must ask you. I mean, obviously, talking about that awful train crash in Aberdeenshire yesterday. Big concerns about whether the train should have actually been allowed to travel at that time, given the fears of mudslides. Network Rail appear to be claiming this is an issue with climate change as a problem, but I mean, we've had terrible storms and water, problems with water on the track and mudslides before. Is that really what could to blame, or does it look like this is actually poor judgment in that train being allowed to actually set off on that journey at that time?
First of all, I went up there yesterday, and when I got there, was taken up in a helicopter and flew over the wreckage, and I have to say it was something from a disaster movie, and my hearts just go out to all the friends and families of the 3 victims and the 6 other people who have been injured. It's a sight that I'd never want to see. And what makes it so shocking, actually, is it's a sight that we've not seen in this country for a very long time. It's 13 years since we've had a derailment where any life has been lost at all. So we're not used to seeing it, but we have seen these things in the past. I represent Welwyn Hatfield, and Hatfield was a site of a very significant rail accident 20 plus years ago, and just down the road on the other side of me, Potters Bar was another infamous rail accident. But we haven't seen those things because we've had a good safety record. So to answer your question about is it flash floods and how much does climate to do with it, the rail investigation, accident investigation branch are up there now. They've flown up to Scotland. They are working on this with the Office of Rail and Road, and Network Rail are there, the British Transport Police. I don't want to preempt what's happened here. What I have asked Network Rail to do immediately is a resilience test across the whole network, and then a report with the interim on my desk by the 1st of September, really digging into exactly the issues you've just raised.
Okay, thank you very much indeed for joining us, Transport Secretary Grant Shapps.